First of all, it's going to be in English. That's a bit odd. I think we all speak Spanish, and it's about Spain. But this was a result of a dissertation that was written in English. We'll be more comfortable in English. And it was announced in English, so we will do it in English. And let's see also if people from outside that want to connect, talk and talk a bit more. I must say I met Armela just 30 minutes ago, but somehow a few months ago, I realized that there was this dissertation on realistic evaluation applied to the Spanish case. And I thought this is very exceptional. And we have confirmed that there is basically, that we know, no realist evaluation approach done in Spain that we know of in any area. And we don't know of any approach of realist evaluation on science, technology, and innovation policy worldwide. So this is a first in two senses. And as Armela will present, realist evaluation is an approach that really fits very well with some of the issues that Eugenio discussed. It's with our ethos of how evaluation should be conducted. So it is very interesting to have an approach to realist evaluation that has as a point of analysis Spain and science and technology innovation policy. This is a first ever. We have to have Eugenio, and here she is. And then there is even more, because her profile, it's a profile that I would say you find it in Anglo-Saxon countries, you do not find it in Spain. There's a person that has, she's from Albania, right?
Yeah,
came to Spain in Erasmus, stayed, entered the public service. She's a public servant, and as a public servant in the ministry, is also doing a dissertation, a PhD dissertation at UCL. I don't know how many cases of that there are. I don't know of any.
Want more cases of that.
We want more cases of that, but I don't know of any apart from that. So that's another thing which she's a first, and therefore we are just honored that she accepted the invitation, and I'm looking forward to her presentation on realistic evaluation, learning from Spanish public administration institutions, and I think the point of analysis will be the Severo Ochoa grants. So the floor is yours, and yeah, probably have about 40 minutes, 50 minutes. How much to do?
Yeah. 35, 40 minutes for presentation and then 20 minutes for.
Yes, lovely. Yes, this is what I thought it would be. So there are 30 slides there. So I am really humbled and very thankful that Jordi invited me, because Eugenio is my reference. It has been my reference during the years at UCL. So I am really pleased that I'm here today. This presentation we'll talk about those three sentences that you saw. First of all, why is science policy hard to evaluate, and how can this critical realism approach offer any solutions? So the philosophical, epistemological part. And then I went into evaluating the program, the Severo Ochoa Centers of Excellence program. This was a program that I worked with at the very beginning. I was involved in rapporteuring in the evaluation committees. So this is where I started to think, perhaps I want to see what the effects of the program were. And then I contacted SPRU, and then SPRU took me to UCL to do the doctorate. And UCL was interested in this, that I had been working in this program that then I was going to do a research about. This kind of novelty of bringing this researcher's identity into the public servant and how this works. So this is the third part. Science policy is hard to evaluate for different reasons, and it has already been mentioned in the literature now for decades. In the recent years, as we all know, there has been some new concerns and new offers regarding the research evaluation, not as much the science policy evaluation. And in terms of kind of bringing some solutions from the critical realism, that is a philosophy that stands between the positivistic approach and the constructivistic approach. So you have the critical realism that offers this, this middle ground between the actual and the subjective. So if we see the evaluation of having 4 foundations, first of all, in terms of accountability, this is the feature the science policy evaluation literature as well shows. And it as well, this literature that is there brings forward that there is a challenge in terms of understanding the impact of the science and innovation policy, and in terms of understanding the context. So evaluation kind of loses, has been focused a lot on impact, and it had lost this part of context. Therefore, critical realism is very important. Then, regarding the social inquiry, the second pillar, the systematic use of the scientific methods, science policy evaluation can be considered a discipline. But hey, it's one of its founders, Ben Martin himself, he said, well, but we are quite rigid, because it fell into evaluating just those programs, but in terms of the economic impact, first of all. Therefore, what critical realism brings on board is this adaptability of methods regarding on the demands or on the policy instruments. As a third foundation regarding the epistemology, of course, the evaluation in science policy is mainly positivistic. This is due to a historical legacy, while the critical realism embraces a more open epistemology, which is as well harder to bring in board because it requires more efforts and time. And then fourth but not least, there is the need for use as a foundation of evaluation. If an evaluation is not used, if it doesn't generate learning, then what for? And there is a challenge of critical realism, and the critical realism solves these challenges. We have to be careful when we talk about that, because it's indeed this middle ground, but these are somehow the solutions that it brings. So for an increased need to understand impact in a broader sense, the critical realist analysis offers a pattern of outcomes. So the same intervention, depending on the circumstances, works in different ways, and it is important to understand for whom does it work, in which context it works, and why. For understanding the dynamic context, critical realism brings forward this concept of generative causality. So it means that the object under study, it's not that creates the change on its own, but it is affected by a series of mechanisms that operate in different contexts and are triggered by different contexts. As regards the adaptability of methods to the demand, the response that critical realism brings is this cumulative theory testing. So a theory or a program theory is not the program or the policy itself, but all the ideas and assumptions that are built around it at the level of conceptualization and implementation. And there is this iteration of theory between the actors. So this can be very complicated, but as well easier, because it brings some depth in the analysis. Then, regarding the need to have a broader view on the knowledge and its validity, the critical realist brings the theory as a unit of analysis. So when you hear about program theory evaluation, that a way it's kind of simplified a lot. It's simplified a lot when we see it. But the theory is how we believe this program should work, and who are we that make it work, from the conceptualization and implementation part of view. And then on being more useful, the realist evaluation with Paulson, he used to work on crime, and he is one of the fathers of realist evaluation, that is a pragmatic way of critical realism. he thinks that for being more useful in terms of policy, we need to have the policymakers on board and we need to use a policy language. All right, so I did something that, something kind of very courageous, but I didn't care because I was working as a contract with Severo Ochoa. I talked to my boss who used to work as a subdirectora general in Severo Ochoa, and I told her, hey, I want to know what this program is going to bring, what the effects of this program. And she told me, do you want to do an evaluation? And I was like, well, no, it's just like very interesting because this program was highly reputed in Spain at that time. This program was launched in 2011 and it was, wow, it was publicized by the minister Garmendia at that time. It was the last program she launched. It was her last year of in office. All right. And anyways, I went and I did it. The thing is that I consider this program as a performance-based institutional funding. I am very optimistic because this program was only 0.6% of what we were funding at state level in Spain, right? In terms of, so this is, I don't know if you're aware of this program. So this grants, structural, performance-based institutional funding, and then the centers or the units go and spend it into their strategies, all right? For this research, for this realist evaluation, I only studied the first 20 centers in the first a full year cycle, and it coincided perfectly because in 4 years there were 20. So the main points from literature is that most of science policy evaluation is basically quantitative. There is no realist evaluation. The use of qualitative data is limited. And in Spain, we unfortunately yet to this point, we don't do science policy evaluation. And you were one of the references, so thank you for that. Anyways, more in detail, I had to go as well into understanding the institutions and institutional learning. And this, so I checked what is a learning organization, how can we have more adaptive policy analysis. And again, here in Spain, it seems to be that our public administration is very rigid, old-fashioned, etc. So the literature says that. Then why science policy evaluate and what critical realism? The father of critical realism is Bascar from 1989, so it's a new approach, new philosophical background. Right, regarding the design and methods, if, I put some detail here, but not as much, so I can explain it if you are more interested. Academically, in the UK, we have this system of doing a small project first, which is called progression, and then you need to pass progression in order to become a PhD or a doctorate candidate. If you don't pass this progression high enough, then you're granted a master's. So in the very first part, on the stage 1 of my research, and this was my progression mini thesis, was the drawing the conceptual model of impact for the Severo Ochoa, right? So this came to be the interviews with the policymakers at the time. First with my boss, so we used the snowball interview, and then with the documents we had, interviews, and me as participant observation. And then on stage 2, and this is the core of my thesis, is the understanding the effects in these 20 awarded centers. Okay, so in the center of the realist evaluation stands the construction and testing of theory. We use this tool, which can be very, very simple, but as well complicated, of connecting contexts with mechanisms and outcomes. The techniques that I used were qualitative. There were documentary review, interviews, and participant observation. Stage 1 was between October and September, October 2016 and September 2018, and stage 2 between October 2018 and October 2020. In this stage 2, I visited the 20 centers, which is except for one, I visited them, which was great for me, not only as a researcher, but as a policy analyst, as a policy officer. And we don't do it. We don't do it at the ministry. They don't do it at the research funding agency. When you visit the centers, you get the feeling and you understand. And indeed, it's not quantitative, but it is there. So this was a great happiness for me to see them. And then as well, I used this literature in terms of methodology, realist literature, but of how we do these realist interviews, and I did elite interviews at the very beginning. This is as it. Okay, so in terms of research design, the context is turning on and off the mechanisms, and the mechanisms create causality, right? Then the mechanisms influence change as they operate in different contexts. The outcomes are a configuration, and they explain the observed effects through the contextualization and this generative causality. So at the very beginning, my context and mechanism and outcome configuration, I tried to understand when was the program designed, what mechanism were they put in place, when they were creating the Severo Ochoa, and then they imagined outcomes from the policymakers. And wow, this is fantastic, because this is not what only was on the board regarding Severo Ochoa. So this is very enlightening. And there are people now coming and saying, wow, I didn't know that this happens because this other thing didn't happen. So all the counterfactual. This is why it was so rich for me to do that. Then on the second stage, then I, of course, checked into the context, visited the centers, saw the bibliometric performance of the centers, etc. And initially, I had to categorize the centers. I had to put some characteristics, and I did it on three huge chunks. First of all, the legal entity of the center. Were they autonomous? Were they mixed centers, normally CSIC and university ones? Or were they only CSIC centers, also CSIC, the National Research Council in Spain? And then the research type, were they basic? Were they from basic to applied, or either applied? And then the size, were they small? Because the literature as well shows that size matters in terms of this. For me, small was less than 200, were there medium, 200 to 400, and then more than 400 for people. This was a very important table that I brought out regarding the bibliometric performance of all of these centers, comparing the previous to Severo Ochoa and then after Severo Ochoa, 8 years previous and post. So these are the 20 centers, and the green show increase in all their bibliometric performance. And if you see the red, they are really smaller decreases. The documentary reviews, interviews, and participant observation. Okay, and in terms of text analysis, I used NVivo program. NVivo was not ready for the realist, for the SIMIO SMOs. So it took me so much time. And I used these double matrix techniques, because it comes to be that in NVivo you cannot join three texts, so context, mechanism, and outcome. So I had to code first context and mechanism, and then recode context, mechanism, and outcome. Well, if I enter into much detail, and then you would see there the dark violet are where then I would choose the simios that were more relevant and then study them and illustrate them. Regarding the conceptual model of impact, I drew a graph. It was easier to and less dangerous to draw a graph in this first part. So this is what the research shows in terms of the conceptual model of impact. First of all, in the context of economic plenitude, and here we're talking before, so here we're talking 2007, before 2007, 2005, 2007. In the context of economic plenitude, the idea is generated as a request of universities to fund their research activities structurally and abundantly from the state government. But through the mechanism of shaping demands and keeping the focus on the excellent structures, the policymakers believe that this would promote a change in behavior of the CSIC and universities to enhance excellence-oriented structures inside the organizations. So here we see, as a context, in economic plenitude, the CRUE, the Conference of Rectors, requested for funding. I don't know if you're interested into these details, because this is now the policy, requested for funding. There was already the Campus of International Excellence that they were given all around Spain, and the policymakers were not seeing any kind of results out of that. And there was as well Consolider that was given in the groups all around Spain and to every, nearly every research group. As a mechanisms, right, the Severo Ochoa as a whole was kind of, thought on two dimensions, the mechanism. First, the institutional excellence and the strategic autonomy. So the policymakers were thinking that by giving stable funding, these centers could be able to compete internationally and they could attract talent. But still, as universities are autonomous, the policymakers were thinking about the influence on CSIC mostly. This is very interesting. And then, as well, a little bit on these, as the CSIC centers showed management obstacles at the time, and this is why they were thinking. The second context mechanism outcome is that during the economic crisis, the program would generate impact. It was the economic crisis that hit in 2008, 2009, and as well, it was the last year of the mandate of Garmendia that would bring forward this Severo Ochoa that possibly it was said and thought that it would create both resilience and impact. And in terms of impact as well, they were wanting to see more sponsorship and patronage that compared to international ones we were lacking in Spain, we still are. It is interesting to see how then in the thesis, you can check it, how then the Severo Ochoa was transformed into an award because the funding ran down. Because they were firstly thinking about having 5 million a year per center, but as the funding went down, they broke the award dimension. So they didn't have the award in mind at that time till the crisis came. Okay, the third one is the valorization of excellence at the institutional level changes the system perception. So bringing forward this Ivory League, these excellent centers in Spain, the policymakers at the time were thinking that this could change the perception of the Spanish system abroad, because the rankings abroad and the average always put us down. And here we're seeing the international reviews, OECD and European Commission, and as well that we have a fragmented system, they were aware of it. And as an outcome, this is why they believe that by funding and highlighting and valorizing the best, this could support. Okay, the better positioning. And this is very important because this is really working now outside of the system, going into these institutions. So in a context where most of the institutions didn't have funding for strategy, except for some, that they were the regional ones, the Catalan ones at that time, and now the Basque and some more. The design of an instrument that could give the best centers the capacity to develop their own strategy would create autonomous structures. This was a bit of wishful thinking, because how can this create autonomous structures of excellence with flexibility, administration, and leadership, right? But they were thinking that through this, then the centers themselves, the big umbrella centers, would give autonomy structures too. And these are the outcomes, the effects of that. And the context, the Severo Ochoa in terms of money and in terms of award itself, and the effects. And then, how are we doing with time, by the way?
Last 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so the three highlights, if the effects, and here there are lots of words because we need to, I mean, words perhaps say it better, adequately than just figures. Three highlights and three sets. I mean, talent attraction and retention is a prime effect of the Severo Ochoa. It has affected all the centers in any kind of activity. It has no dependence on the contextual aspects in terms of the center's ambition, but yes, in terms of the center's recruitment. So my thesis, the research shows that the autonomous ones could really attract the best and in a short time, and the CSIC ones did not, because they would, I mean, it is, they would spend nearly a year to recruit somebody. Secondly, the most important mechanism here is the dimension of flexibility and versatility of the funding. And this is important for the policymakers to know. This was important to enable growth in all the centers. So having structural funding that the centers can make their own strategies is important. And thirdly, there are some observations that the agency and self-esteem that the Severo Ochoa Award has brought into the centers, and there are no specific contextual aspects. So this was done in the CSIC centers, autonomous or mixed. Scientific quality. Severo Ochoa has enabled the centers to carry out structural changes and perform new programs that have led to higher scientific quality. No contextual characteristics have triggered the scientific quality change, but it's true that smaller size centers seem to have increased their scientific quality, and there are signs that bigger centers have become more resilient into maintaining their top scientific quality, and this is in line with what literature says. The financial crisis appears to have been an external contextual aspect that has not affected the scientific quality. And this is a lot to say with what has happened in Spain during the years of this research from 2011, 2014. But anyways, more research is needed to draw the link between the resilience and the crisis and the severity. Impact. There is a wide range of interconnected impacts associated to the Severo Ochoa. Mostly the global ones, so these centers are really international. The funding dimension and the award dimension has been important. So some centers have used the awards to have more impact, especially in international networks, and this is important for us to know, right, as policymakers. But of course, that impact is triggered from a context of the legal entity. So more autonomous centers have had higher impact. More research is needed to understand the impact processes. And as well, in the future, I would have liked to study more the green transition dimension, because it has changed so much since the design of this to nowadays, right? And the sustainable transition. Okay, partnerships. Severo Ochoa has affected the partnership creation and leadership of the centers. And as well, the contextual dimension has been the legal personality. The autonomous centers have been more active to have more partnerships, even at national level. The relations with industry, they have had relations with industry, and this is in line with the literature. Patronage, okay. The award and labeling dimension has had an influence. So some centers have used their Severo Ochoa label to attract more sponsorship. Here, the compromise of La Caixa is key. Again, the autonomous centers have been more able to use the patronage. Strategy, okay. So the strategy, I'm talking about the scientific strategy of centers. There has been an effect on Severo Ochoa. Again, the legal personality has been key. For example, in case of the CSIC centers, Severo Ochoa has enabled the creation of strategy with possibilities to be implemented. In the mixed ones, it has supported the implementation, and the autonomous, it has reinforced the research aspects. And as well, it has made it more flexible, for example, to change their strategies, which is fantastic. It's what came out from the research is that this renewal characteristic of the award and the funding gives a longer vision, and it was appreciated by the director. Governance. It has triggered some changes in the government. In the CSIC centers, the research shows that Severo Ochoa as a whole has been traumatic, has shown some traumatic processes of top-down leadership changes. More research is needed in this aspect because we cannot associate it directly. In the mixed centers, it has triggered change in terms of leadership and the creation of a known Severo Ochoa governance, because so these beheaded governance in centers. And in the autonomous ones, it has been related to growth, to improve effectiveness planning. Administration and management, again, changes affected by the legal personnel. What was interesting is that Severo Ochoa has as well created these kind of new relations with the founders or the funders that they are more or less the same. It has generated a feeling of recognition from the state government to the awarded centers. So this accomplishes what that idea of the policymakers that they wanted to have some kind of recognition. So the most important mechanism here has been the award dimension, but it's not fully exploited. So we should work better, and the ministers should work better to exploit this award and collaborate more with the centers. Research shows that the regional governments as well have reinforced their excellence policies. As regards the perceived behavior, it is observed that it is dependent to the leadership of the institution, political leadership of the institution. During the period of the time, it has not showed any support during those years, which was very interesting. On the contrary, there is no evidence that the CSIC undertook any excellence-related activity during that period. Now things have changed a little bit. Evidence shows that universities took as well some steps to promote the Severo Ochoa, and the relationship with other core funders as well was effective. And this is as well seen to a certain extent in the literature. And I finish here. The reflective learning and how I became a researcher while I was working was a process very interesting. I used two tools, tactics and the research diary. I had never used the research diary, and it was great. Perhaps you do because you are researchers, but having like a book with me and writing down these reflections on the research while I was working was important. And then there is quite a literature for that. And I finish here. Oh, and that picture should be on another slide. Anyways, so the director of the research funding agency saw me in July, and he said he had read my thesis, and he thanks me for this evaluation. I thank you for having me here, and I stop it here.
And I was really like it. I was wondering how this can be translated to.
Wow.
So I really enjoy it, and I really read your thesis and your contact my mother. So thank you.
Yeah, and contact me. I'm available. Yeah.
And I have questions because you said that critical realism in policy is a pragmatic approach inside. It's about involving policymakers.
Yeah.
And how this relates with you are the person.
Yes. So now I work. Yes. So I am a public employee.
Yeah, I know.
Yes.
It says if you are the policymaker in your business.
Yes. Yes. The conceptual model was with them, not with the minister, because she gave me this kind of, but with, yes, with the 5 people before the minister, because this comes from before the minister, even though it's recognized as a Garmendia thing, and during, and the ones that implemented the first call. Yes, so I contacted them, and I worked at the very beginning, but not in the conceptualization, but as an officer during the first call of proposals. I worked, and the second one.
And I have another question is about strategy. You can some examples about the changes in the strategy of the centers.
Oh,
What you
yes.
like the most, and this idea of Severo Ochoa collaborates.
Oh, yes,
Some
yes.
examples about this
Yes,
idea.
because this is a, yes. So the funding is given upon the Severo Ochoa and Maria de Maeztu. This is not studying Maria de Maeztu. It would be interesting to have another study on that, because I believe Maria de Maeztu has created even more change than Severo Ochoa. But so the funding is given uh, to a research strategy or a research plan to each of the centers. So they have the flexibility to implement their research strategy, and they use the funding for that. Now, this is the Severo Ochoa research strategy, but then the center could have had another strategy, and the Severo Ochoa itself has influenced the center's strategy in some cases, because every center had, for example, the CSIC centers, they, in theory, they have their strategies, because every 2 years, I think the CSIC does that. But with this, they were not able to develop it. So with the Severo Ochoa, they started to have it seriously and involve everyone. And the autonomous ones, they started to become more professional, like creating perhaps an innovation office or a communication office. But in some centers, because it was hard enough inside, there were a double governance, the Severo Ochoa governance and the rest of the center. So
some examples that you like or you feel they are
because this is autonomous, and I cannot give now examples that you can then real. This is anonymous. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But because the idea of the Severo Ochoa was to create a strategy as the center itself, there were in some cases, some divisions in the centers, and they were having these dual strategies. So the excellent on one side, and I didn't go into studying like the why of these kind of corruption in terms of the strategies of the center, but it can be very interesting to, in case there is interest, to understand this better and how the mother organizations influenced it. Because in terms of the CSIC centers, the ones that in these 20 ones, there were a couple of CSIC centers. In some of them, there was a dramatic change. Yeah.
I have a few questions as
Go
well, but
Go ahead.
I always go on for hours. Well, just one to start with. Could you just explain a bit more about the legal, because the legal standing seems to be super important.
Yes.
For everything. Could you explain a little bit more about that? what is this? What is an autonomous
Okay.
unit?
Yes.
Or a center? I mean,
Yes.
I don't understand how they are autonomous.
Oh, yes. So autonomous is a research center that has its legal personality, and it works as an independent organization, like, for example, a foundation or an association. That does not, so it develops its management, its recruitment, its day-to-day management autonomously, without, like a company, let's say, but it has public funding, so of course it needs to follow public rule, but it doesn't have on top of it a university or CSIC that would control, that would, yeah.
The circuit system is kind of.
So are we just
Yes,
talking
so they are
about
the CERCA centers. Yes, they were the CERCA ones.
Yeah.
And now the Basque, the Gunes, and the Imdeas later on.
Well, the Basque were not there. I don't know whether they are moving in that direction.
Yes.
But the Basque,
The first ones from the early 2000s are the Catalan centers. And as well, yes.
With this one, important, this kind of data is very important. In a way, it confirms something you would suspect, but
Yes.
have more than
Yes.
evidence that the effect has been differential according to the structure and the circuit system.
So there are no autonomous centers outside of Catalonia and the Basque.
Yes, there are. Yes, there are. The thing is, autonomous and excellent at the. Yes, there are nowadays in Spain. So there are IMDEAs are in Madrid, and in the Basque Country, the GUNE are as well. They are autonomous. They are independent. They work like companies in a way.
So
Yeah.
they can
University.
They can hire people without.
Yes, universities in Spain as well are autonomous, but yes.
Okay.
I mean, an anecdote on autonomy. I mean, when Valencia started the project, the Excellence, their own, what they call their own talent attraction system. I remember going there and said, well, if you're going to have an Andrea, if you want to get Valencia there,
Yeah.
I said, if you want to have an Andrea, you need to have the circuits. You cannot have an Andrea without circuits. You have to have the foundations that manage the Andrea system and the foundations that manage the research.
Yeah.
I was told, no, in Valencia we cannot have foundations because foundations have changed lots of problems for us. And sure enough, the talent attraction system that was kind of a scaled down system that has nothing to do with the foundation. Because the prayer system is basically wills within wills of foundations.
Yes,
So
they are either foundations or associations in terms of like legal law, like normative. Yes, they are normally they are foundations. Yes.
no more foundations.
Yes.
Not all the foundations are in circle.
Yes. No, yes.
And the players can go to the university and the city if they want to, but surprise, the majority go to foundations.
And then CENIO and CSIC as well at state level, they are foundations and they are autonomous. Autonomous.
I have two questions to better understand. So in the pool of centers you analyzed, there was no center, for instance, no institute from any public university, because
yes, there were a couple of CSIC university institutes.
Yeah, but
none from just a university. And this is, I believe, I don't know for sure because we have not researched it, the Maria de Maeztu creation is for departments of universities.
Yeah.
And that, yeah, it would be so interesting to understand what happened with that.
Yeah, and then a second question that I think probably goes out of the scope of your research, but the Severo Ochoa program funds a 4-year program, right?
Yes.
So I guess that you didn't saw what happened in with the centers that finished the that ends the funds at the fourth year, and then what happened in the governance and impact on all the elements that you analyzed afterwards?
Because I studied the centers in 2016, so they had already finished their 4-year.
Yeah.
And a couple of them had not renewed.
Yeah.
So yes, so I checked them.
And
I think 18 of them had renewed, and this is what this vision of renewal that gave them like very long-term perspective, and they were thankful to that. And the ones that didn't renew as well, that they were losing it, but then they got it back, except for one. Yeah, so I checked that.
Okay.
So the 4 years had already finished when I studied the centers.
Okay. So the idea of renewing the funds is also in the policy design, right?
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
it's not just giving 4 years funds
Yeah.
and then letting.
Yes, it's not a choice. It's how the law of subvenciones works in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
You work for 4 years and 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when we had the evaluations, we had one Nobel Prize in the physics committee, and he said, "Why don't you do it like Korea and give 13 years of funding?"
Mm-hmm.
And then my bosses were like, "Yes, because we can only give for 4 to 4 years."
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes, yes.
Very interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
The solution that there have been an increasing number of centers that have not been renewed.
Yes, nowadays, yes.
Nowadays, and now this is the problem. I understand. Well, at least in the centers that don't get renewed.
Yeah,
But at the
yeah,
cross, and
yeah.
to see that are a bit annoyed that
Yeah.
several of the centers that have renewed.
Yeah, this kind of funding was so attractive for the centers that they were the ones that didn't renew. They were like, "What a trauma! What a trauma!"
Mm-hmm.
Because this is flexible funding that really and as well as the Cerca centers. I didn't go into describing that in the thesis because it was not part. But the Cerca centers, they said, when we receive the funding from the Catalan government, it's mostly on organizational funding. Of course, they are allowed to work on that, but it's not a strategic funding either. So this kind of new funding given from the state government was appreciated.
I have a question. I have two questions. One regarding the Severo Ochoa program, and I'm wondering if those, for example, those centers you just mentioned, that they didn't get the funding there after 4 years. So were they somehow punished for that? The ministry. So if you have the fund and you don't get the fund again, means that you haven't proceeded properly again. You haven't improved your results or whatever. And then, so they've given you, I don't know how many millions because I got lost on that.
Well, it's $1 million a year for the centers.
This is now.
It was before as well.
It was, okay,
Yeah.
so it's 4 million.
Yeah.
And your figures do not improve, then what's going on? Or so this is my first question. Yeah, my first question.
Yeah.
What happens with these centers?
So they're fun. So the evaluation of the centers. So this is the policy thing. So I didn't study this, but I know how the program is running. So the evaluation of the centers is again from scratch. So you study the last period, and then the new strategy. Basically, if it's not renewed, so it starts from zero. The experts don't know that they were a Severo Ochoa and we need to renew them, or it starts from scratch. So perhaps sometimes the strategy, I don't know now, this is an evaluation thing from the external experts.
Okay. So it's the same in Spain. I mean, there is not an exposed evaluation. So these centers got 4 million euros and nobody evaluated the impact of these 4 million euros in terms of
This
society.
is the thing, you see.
But it happens with all the programs in research programs in Spain.
We don't, you know that I mean, I'm saying this, but the thing is, it would be good to have somebody from the agency to discuss this. And I think the research community doesn't ask for program evaluation either. Because if we go into, I mean, if the research community asked, I mean, another thing would have happened. But the agency, yeah, and the agency said they would invite me to explain as well this, because the thesis is so long, so I can explain. When I met with the director, we talked about evaluation, but he said, oh, thanks for doing this, thanks for doing it. And I was like, we can do more. Like, because I am interested to do it, but at an academic level as well. The research community should ask.
Okay, and the second question is devoted to your thesis. And it's because I don't see welcome here, so I would like, could you explain to me again the model? So I was not sure if I understood the way you measured things in order to obtain those conclusions and things
Oh,
you
yes.
presented. Yeah.
So it was mainly text analysis.
That's it. You work with en vivo.
Yes.
With the interviews.
With the public document review and then interviews. Yes.
And then what's.
And you code.
Yeah.
You can do multiple coding for context, for mechanisms, like in the sentence and the outcomes, and then you combine. So you use this double combination technique, because it doesn't combine three codes at the same time, which is very weird.
That part I understood, but then you mentioned outcomes. What is an outcome then? Could you name some outcomes?
Yes, so the outcomes is, for example, oh, we have seen more self-esteem.
Okay,
since
because I couldn't read it.
Yes, or oh, our publications have risen. Oh, we have this new industry collaboration because they checked on the news we were Severo Ochoa, or things like that. So these were the outcomes.
But not only what they said, because
and what I could see as well in the documents.
Not only after the score, not only after the interview. If you say, I was mentioning the paper, and there is no paper.
Yes.
So you need to control that.
Yes.
But were those outcomes defined in advance before conducting the interviews, or did you come up with them just based on what you found in the
So you have some sort of idea before, but then the interviews are semi-structures and they bring new things. For example, self-esteem. It was not there, or oh, we are better recognized as a field, or oh, I'm working with it. So yeah.
No, because I was thinking, about maybe having some kind of more systematic approach because of what people tell you. Not there can be a high variation in terms of what people conceive as an outcome based on their own perception without having
And these are yes. So this is a story of success in a way. This is what it tells, and the thesis as well says it. And if we would want to go more in detail for specific outcomes, for example, perhaps impact or these governance changes, even though it's a bit tricky, then we need to go and explore even more the stories behind them there.
Something that I think it would be very illuminating would be trying to actually show the different patterns that each research center have in terms of can you cluster them based on some specific features and some kind of visualization that actually give you some kind of grasp about different clusters.
Yeah, do you think this would be good? Because me too, I was thinking.
Awesome,
yeah, the thing is that it was very hard to. I had to be careful when I clustered then the centers, and it would need further studies, and this is why I just put text and even the thesis. There is this second part. There is a lot of.
I don't really know how text analysis is done in a qualitative way, but quantitative. If you have a bunch of words that you have identified as relevant in taxonomy, you take them how many times each word appears and so on. So the relative frequency, distribution of each word and so on. And then you see how many of these sentences have high or low frequencies, that kind of thing. So that allows you to cluster some sentence based on the
There has to be a reason.
to actually understand the effects of the Severo Ochoa program and how they affected the governance outcome of these research. Yeah, well, it's François, then David, and you, right? Amalo as well.
I was wondering, does this Severo Ochoa bring some diversity in the funding of centers and probably bring more private funding of centers?
Wow, I didn't check the diversity. But wow, indeed it has brought more private. It has brought more private because it has brought like Aisha funding to all of the centers at the very beginning, not anymore now. And it has brought a couple of other foundations as well on board, plus some industry funding too. But diversity of funding as itself, I didn't analyze it.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. It was super interesting. I was very interested in this CMO framework, the context mechanism. I was thinking, and I think I didn't fully understand. So the CMO, the graph you presented, that was what the policymakers think how the program should go. And
yes, the intended outcomes.
Okay. So the outcomes at the end of the graph was intended.
Yes, imagined or intended,
okay.
yes.
So you made that with the 5 policymakers you mentioned,
yes.
the documents, and then you go to the centers and ask about the
yes.
outcomes.
And and develop from the outcomes. I developed the interviews.
From the outcomes.
The intended outcomes.
You develop the outcomes.
Yes.
Because you maybe
and this is at the end of my thesis.
I didn't get it. Yeah, I didn't know the way.
I didn't say that.
I thought the outcomes came from the analysis of the text, as Adriana just mentioned.
The intended ones?
I didn't got.
Oh, because there are
two.
It's like these 2 researches. No, this first stage it was like a mini project, and then the second. So the first one, it somehow. So the thesis has got the details. So first there are what the convocatoria says, and all of that, and then. Wow, and there's so much rich what then they say, right? And what, yeah.
So my question was, this, if I understood well, this CMO framework is a way to understand social work, no? Every
yes.
phenomena.
Like one of the instruments for critical realism to understand, yes.
So I was thinking if you can maybe, it could be done like doing a CMO for what the centers do, not only for the policymakers thinking. Not thinking about the outcomes, but really thinking about the context is where the money and what is the mechanism of each center.
Yes.
That's a typical realist way to.
Yes, to how they implement or how they play. Yes.
But not only with the outcomes, but the total.
In my case, I had to do it like this. No, it's not difficult to do that. It's fantastic to do something like how they take, for example, this instrument or any policy instrument or any policy instrument, and then study the CMOs there. But in my case, I wanted to know like the effects of the program, the policies.
In the O of the CMO, no way. No?
Yes. And then it would be fantastic to see like each category, for example, the young researchers or like and study that as well. And it comes out quite, it's the research that brings it then.
And the CMO is like the core of the
realism. Yes, the realist evaluation. Yeah, and then the pattern of outcomes.
How critical realism. I mean, I very much support the idea of realism on the socialist feasibility. It's good, but is there anything critical about this? I mean, where's the critical element? And Basquiat himself, the further he went on, the more he just ended up with Marxist dialectics.
Yes, this is why I was,
And so I don't see the critical side, and I'm just interested whether you try to have a critical dimension in your thesis.
Oh yes, I was totally critical. When you work in this authoritarian public administration, in authoritarian settings, your critique is it there? Yeah. It can be a complaint, it's not a critique. So the approach of working in this program for me was all unpacking and being critical, and so the philosophical underpinning of my study, it is critical, for sure. I told Jordi I was accepted in a conference in August of critical realists, and they kind of smashed me out because I was too pragmatic. But because I had done something like hands-on.
And because you're explaining things using simple vocabulary instead of...
Yes, so they are very philosophical
most,
now.
Yeah,
They're very philosophical, and
I forced myself to run back up.
ah.
And I like Bob, Bhaskar is much worse.
Yeah, so this is like, and basically they told me like, oh, this realist approach is a bit pragmatic. The policies will never change. Well, but anyways.
Where can we get the pieces?
Oh, yes.
Can you put the number?
Yes, I can put the link. I thought you had already downloaded it because there are so many downloads from Spain. So who has done? I don't know. Okay, so I think I have to go online somewhere. Yes, it's online. You can just search Armela Dino UCL and it's there, but I think, yeah. Oh, UCL. Oh yeah, there it is, I think. Then you can send it. Yeah. I think it was on the, so there it is. Yes, okay.
Okay. Thanks very much for the presentation. I agree that also the language you use is very easy for, because I always faced once a similar approach, not for an evaluation process, but in a thesis, and it had very, very hard to assess it. That is, I have to say. But that's, so thanks for the clarity. I have a couple of questions, maybe more on method. In this type of approaches, does it make sense to consider centers, for instance, that did not get it, so that applied and did not get it, or simply not applied but are potentially similar in performance or eligible, let's say? Would it make sense to put them in the analysis?
Yes.
As a comparison?
Yes, because this is an effect of a program as well. The fact that they are applying can be seen. Yes, but I didn't go in because it was too much for me. Yes.
But you consider that?
Yes, we considered it as an opportunity, but then it would have been too big for just a sole person. Yeah, but it would be so interesting. This the perspective of
And then the second question is, you emphasize this distinction between these different types of centers in terms of the importance of context. And I was wondering whether there is also some variation within those. So, for instance, if you look at the 6 centers.
Oh, the regional perspective, you mean? The regional context?
The regional context, or maybe other types of factors that may affect, but I would be surprised if all these things, even when set in a similar institutional setting, might have a similar reaction with regards to the capacity to define their own strategy and implement it. So I was wondering whether there was a variation within, because I would have to imagine that the variation.
Oh, a variation. Okay, yes.
But if you say, for instance, not all the centers were equally capable in applying, implementing this strategy, or not equally flexible. But I was wondering whether that may apply also within any of these categories. Did you explore that?
I did not explore this. This is fascinating, but this would have required more visits, stays at a couple of centers. So when we consider how to design this this study, we were thinking either this and selecting a couple of different centers and really doing like long studies, or doing the 20 and checking. But it does make sense if we want to do more in depth.
The things that potentially we had that seems to be exploiting the data.
And perhaps yes. Yes.
Yeah, I have a bit of a variety of questions about the realist evaluation. The question is, what makes an evaluation approach really realist evaluation? Because I've done, but I did at one point in one evaluation apply a single concept.
Yes.
But that's life, right? Okay, context mechanisms are not.
Yes.
So I'm going to structure my analysis looking, as Ocean says, what works for whom, and the for whom depends on the context. So you introduce this into the analysis, and then you get the kind of results you get in terms of saying, if your management structure is flexible, then you have these effects. If the context is different, you have another effects. So you are looking really what works for whom and that's right. But this, in a way, when I did that in one small analysis, that was the issue. It's how you structure your approach, the concepts you use, and then the methodology is extremely light.
Yes.
Something like 2 minutes, robustness zero. Now, when you present it, then you go into something that looks like realistic evaluation. And I took a note. The outcomes is narrates the observed effects through contextualizations, fine, and generative causality. One is how you narrate an observed effect through a concept of generative causality, and then are able to capture impact and effect comprehensively. So that's kind of a big claim. So
Yes.
there's 2 aspects. So to do realist evaluation, do you have to have an approach that explicitly analyzes causality from a generative point of view? And if so, how do you do that? And second, do you need to be so ambitious as to say that you capture impact and effect comprehensively? Because then my idea definitely was not realist evaluation. But,
Well, yes, I think, Jordi, yes. So basically, let's not be too deterministic, right, with all of this, if we want to be realistic there. So I think these CMOs that we can see in some realist evaluations, only evaluations, especially of health, crime, education studies, they are kind of evaluations needed, and indeed there is not a lot of it feels like the understanding, it feels like the author detaches from the understanding of what the research is brought. And I believe that in this case, although the fact that it could be like more in depth in several things, etc., I have included this understanding, and the thesis shows it. I mean, when one explains like what has happened regarding some outcomes and how the Severo Ochoa was linked. So you build this, you generate this causality, but I generate it, and it's an interaction between the researcher and the directors and and what it is said in the centers, because this was mainly built with the research directors and interviews. But it is either this, or we go into this deterministic perspective and what is the data saying only. So
when you talk of generative causality, you understand generative causality as being able to be identified through a relation. It's a more constructive.
Yes.
Okay.
it's supposed to be differentially constructed.
Well, it's a
It's
mix.
supposed to be. The generative, it's more structural. To me, it's more structural. It's generated more by structural forces than it is by that it's constructed as more bottom-up kind of approach. And people argue about that.
So I don't know
Yes,
whether-
a lot.
All the
But
time.
anyways, yes.
I don't know whether labeling is important. Maybe it is.
It's
I think it is.
important in terms of how do you understand what generative is. You asked the question, how do you understand what generative is? Well, one way to understand it is this sets off a whole lot of processes at the micro level.
Yeah.
And things start to chatter and change is generated because of the thing that they set off. Another way to look at it is to say, well, this is about structural forces, this is about funding, this is about politics, and these big structures grind together and something different starts. And that's the more deterministic structuralist kind of approach. And because critical realism was supposed to be a critique of the social political structures in general, that's where it's a broad social theory, and it's supposed to provide the capacity to critique society and capitalism and democracy and authoritarianism and everything. It actually, when you read the theory, it seems much more like a structuralist kind of about big forces. Whereas I think what we're talking about here is much more what you're talking about. It's more this micro
No, I mean,
Yeah.
I think
stuff that bubbles up.
now I started to understand, because when I read it, the only thing I read it was already.
Yeah.
Kind of know a bit, but it's not very much. And what these guys do very well, and all the big names in evaluation do very well, is they refer to social theory, and then apply social theory to the foundation of an evaluation.
Yeah.
And that's clearly what you say. Now I understand that that's what has happened in realism. And the application is not in line with the social theory. It's a simple part of differential.
I think that's really true. And what is great about this presentation compared to your friend who has now decided to graft critical realism onto multi-level theory.
Oh yeah? Oh, that's good.
So now because everybody said, so niche, upscaling, thingy, but how does any of that happen? So you're saying, well, I've looked at all the theories and I think critical realism fits best. So now the explanation for mid-level theorizing and Nietzsche's and whatever it is critical realist approach. And this is to me like exactly what you're talking about, which you try to take something from it as a fit. Whereas this was built in right from the start and this drives the logic of the process. So,
but one of the issues why I'm a bit concerned with generic conversation, I think it's important and simplified concept, is because in the word also puts it in relative evaluation. It sets it up as a direct, explicit critique to experimental methods.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, the answer to your question from the realist world was no. I'm not going to do
But
exactly
I'm not.
what
I mean, you may
this
understand
is a different
that.
understanding of concept.
Yeah, the thing is that you see, perhaps this was simple because I work more on policy and less in research. So I am very applied. But anyways, it's beautiful to listen you discuss this. Yeah. And this is why I want to keep in touch with research.
I think the way you've done it makes a lot of sense.
Oh, thank you.
And I interpreting it, I think, from the perspective of Georgie's talking about, you can, it's the question about whether it's not becoming constructivist becomes a debate.
Well,
But
yes.
I think from the point of view, from a policy perspective, you sell okay, what you have in the evaluation in a context like the Spanish is the auditing bit, tick the boxes, and then the other one that if you're going to do a robust evaluation, you need to have an econometric method and you have to have an experimentation of one sort. Now, if you sell this, you have to sell it, I guess, in the way the realist evaluation portion does it, as a direct, indirect contradiction to experimental methods as a way of generating evidence from policy. That's a hard sell. But you have to go that way. And so because what you have to say is the methods by which you identify causation are not on the couple, are generated in direct text. And you have to go to the same. So you cannot understand the effect of it. You cannot understand the effect of the Ochoa approach by doing a counterfactual approach.
But so his approach, I didn't see it as counterfactual, but as the effects of the program itself.
Yeah, I agree that the first question, the first question is from the direction to some extent, but yeah, you could frame it as a more general thing. But the second one, which is about the
within the variety.
I think that this is a completely different thing. Because this
Yes,
has nothing
it's
to
not
do with
contra-
And I think the risk, I mean, to me, the rationale of your evolutionary program, to me, would lead me to go to that level of thinking, because otherwise, the lesson that I get, the main lesson, is that this distinct context and this level of organization, the autonomous mix, and is determining in a way the whole. And I think that there is much richer story than that.
Yes. In the thesis is not as much, in the research itself, but I need to simplify and put, yes, there is much more story than that. But to tell you the truth, this kind of depending from bigger autocratic organization, for our research groups and research centers, depending on very little flexible organizations is a hinder, is a limitation. But is the limitation of our, anyways, I see it like that, with some kind of responsibility that personally I do not have, but I can do nothing. And the thing is that even the policymakers at that time, they believed that because of this impetus for excellence, more autonomy would be given to the best. And that was not the case. But this is another story.
Listening to the debate and the question we take to you, maybe we cannot talk about causality because we lie in the wild science. We can explain the rest because we need time. But maybe you talk about patterns. Maybe you just compare the imagined outcomes and the other. In a more visual way, we can understand.
Yeah, okay. I understand. Yes. So I didn't want to put it like that because I want to, because perhaps there is not a, but I understand. We could have shown it like this. I could have shown it like that as well. The intended outcomes with the effects themselves. And in the thesis there is a section that talks about it, but I didn't show it in the presentation. I didn't know what interest would there be, but I see for the future ones. Yeah.
I think after this fruitful conversation, we can wrap up the seminar. Thank you very much, Armela, for your presentation and for
oh my God! Thank you. Thank you.